The Quran names Ramadan once. In Surah al-Baqarah, God specifies the month, commands fasting, and offers a reason that most translations render as a single familiar phrase. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you might attain taqwa, the God consciousness that Islamic tradition has always placed at the summit of the inner life. What follows in the same passage is stranger and less often quoted. God says, "When my servants ask you about me, I am near. I answer the call of the one who calls when they call upon me." The verse arrives without transition, embedded in the fasting legislation, as though the proximity of the divine is itself the teaching that hunger is meant to deliver. The Sufi masters took this seriously. They read the whole passage as a single instruction: fast, and you will find that the wall you believed separated you from God was, in some sense, made of food. Every practitioner of Ramadan knows the first 3 days the body protests. Hunger announces itself not as a gentle absence, but as a pressure, a demand, an insistence that something be given. The mind, newly aware of its subordination to the stomach, discovers that a significant portion of what it calls thought is in fact appetite dressed in language. Ibn Arabi describes this in Futuhat al-Makkiyah with characteristic precision. Writing on the nature of hunger, Jew, he distinguishes between the hunger of the body, which any fast satisfies, and what he calls the hunger of the heart, the nafs's craving not for bread but for distraction, for the objects and people and preoccupations that fill what would otherwise be silence. The body's fast, he argues, is only the outer shell of the fast that matters. This Hadith Qudsi was a cornerstone of the Sufi understanding of fasting. God does not say hunger is good for the body, or that it builds discipline, or that it cultivates sympathy for the poor, though the tradition acknowledges all of these. God says hunger is a secret, something hidden inside it, something placed there deliberately. The Persian master Abu Abd al-Rahman al-Sulami collected sayings of the early Sufis on fasting in his Adab al-Suba. One passage records the view of Sahal al-Tustari, who described the alimentary soul, the nafs al-amara, as a fire that food continually feeds. When you cease to feed it, Sal said, the smoke clears. The metaphor recurs across centuries of Sufi writing, fasting as the withdrawal of fuel from the fire that obscures. Al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin contains one of the most systematically developed treatments of fasting in the Islamic tradition. The chapter on Sawm distinguishes 3 levels of fast, a schema that nearly every subsequent Sufi writer acknowledged, adopted, or argued with. The first is Sawm al-Umum, the fast of the common people. abstaining from food, drink, and sexual intimacy during daylight hours. This is the obligatory minimum. It fulfills the letter of the divine command, and al-Ghazali is careful not to diminish it. But he treats it as the doorway, not the room. The second is Sawm al-Khusus, the fast of the elect. Here, the limbs fast alongside the stomach. The tongue abstains from lying, slander, and idle talk. The eyes fast from what they should not see. The ears fast from what they should not hear. The hands fast from what they should not reach toward. The entire body becomes the domain of the fast, not merely the throat. The third is Sawm Khusus al-Khusus, the fast of the elect of the elect. Here, the heart itself fasts. It abstains from concerning itself with anything except God. Al-Ghazali describes this as the highest station, and adds, with characteristic bluntness, that it is nullified the moment one begins thinking about the moment the fast will end. What makes the third fast so demanding is not its austerity, but its impossibility under normal conditions. The heart cannot simply decide to think of nothing but God. It must be prepared. The outer fast is the preparation. Hunger quiets the appetitive soul enough that the heart can begin to hear what it was already beneath all the noise attending to. The Sufis inherited from the Neoplatonic tradition, filtered through Islamic philosophy, a metaphysics in which the heart, qalb, is not a metaphor, but a subtle organ of perception. The lata'if, the organ of spiritual sensation, capable of receiving divine light when it is clean, and opaque to that light when it is covered with what the Quran calls ran, the rust of habitual sin and heedlessness. The image they returned to, generation after generation, was the mirror. A mirror that has not been polished cannot reflect. A mirror covered in dust reflects nothing. The heart, in this framework, is a mirror turned toward the real. But only when clean does it show what stands before it. Rumi develops this image in the Masnavi with his characteristic narrative indirection. He does not argue the point. He tells a story, then another, and the cumulative pressure of his images does the philosophical work. The passage in Book 1 where he compares the nafs to Moses' staff, something ordinary that becomes a serpent when not surrendered to God's hand, carries the same logic. The thing that sustains ordinary life becomes, at a higher level, the obstacle to it. The relevance to fasting is this: the body's demands are not evil in themselves. Food, rest, comfort. The Sufi masters were unanimous that asceticism for its own sake is not the goal. What Ramadan provides is not permanent starvation, but temporary interruption. the silence that hunger makes possible, the gap in which something else might become audible. Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari, writing in his Hikam, the collection of aphorisms that became one of the most widely studied Sufi texts in the Arabic-speaking world, puts the point more gently than al-ghazali, but no less sharply. The aphorism seems at first to be about perseverance. Read in the context of Ramadan, it says something more specific. The quality of attention brought to the first night of the fast will determine the quality of the whole month. Ramadan cannot be begun carelessly and transformed mid-course. The beginning is already the pattern. There is a phenomenology of fasting that is rarely spoken about in popular religious contexts because it is difficult to articulate without sounding like mysticism, which is to say, it is mysticism. Around the third week of Ramadan, something often shifts. The body has adapted. Hunger is present but no longer overwhelming. What takes its place is something harder to name, a quality of attention, a slight thinning of the membrane between ordinary perception and what lies beneath it. The world continues to arrive through the senses, but with less insistence. The person fasting has, without seeking it, become marginally more available to what is already there. The Sufi term for this is not hunger, but faqr, poverty, emptiness, the state of having nothing of one's own. Al-Qushayri's Risala, the great 11th century compendium of Sufi teaching, devotes an entire chapter to faqr and carefully separates it from material poverty. Faqr, for al-Qushayri, is the recognition that the self has no substance of its own. It depends entirely on the real for its existence in each moment. Ramadan, by removing even the ordinary daily prop of food, makes this recognition available to the body as well as the mind. The Sufi masters were careful to distinguish this from mere deprivation. Poverty that produces bitterness, resentment, or self-congratulation is not faqr in the technical sense. It is just poverty. The faqr they spoke of is accompanied by something, a lightness, an openness, a sense that the emptying has made room for something, not possession, but presence. Al-Niffari, whose mawaqif record the divine speech that came to him in moments of spiritual arrest. Mawqif, the station in which God holds the mystic in place and speaks, has a passage that captures this with his characteristically vertiginous directness. Al-Niffari does not explain or elaborate. The saying arrives in his mawaqif as pure statement, but its logic is the logic of the entire Sufi approach to fasting. The absence of ordinary sustenance is not a deprivation, but a redirection. The hunger that the world cannot satisfy becomes the very organ by which God is tasted. Ramadan is not uniformly intense. The tradition builds toward its last 10 nights, and within those toward the odd nights, and within those, toward the night that the Quran describes in terms that every Sufi commentator paused over. Laylat al-qadr, the night of power or destiny, the night which the Quran says is better than 1,000 months. Ibn Arabi, in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, offers a reading of this night that departs from the conventional interpretations. He argues that Laylat al-Qadr is not simply a historical event, the night of the Quran's first revelation, but a recurring cosmic reality. The descent that happens on this night is the descent of divine command into the world of time and form. Each year on this night, the reality of the Quran descends again. The person who is awake, in both senses, the physical and the spiritual, participates in this descent. What does participation mean? For Ibn Arabi, it means that the heart that has been polished through a month of fasting, night prayer, recitation, and sustained attention becomes, on this night, capable of receiving a direct impress of divine reality. Not knowledge about God, but the thing itself. Ibn Arabi reads the spirit, ar-ruh, here not simply as Gabriel, but as the divine breath by which the human being was originally constituted. The breath God breathed into Adam. On this night, what was breathed in at the origin breathes again. The person who has fasted properly is prepared to receive it. This is the structure the whole month has been building toward. The outer fast prepared the inner fast. The inner fast prepared the heart. The prepared heart can receive on Laylat al-Qadr what it could not receive in an ordinary month, saturated as ordinary life is with noise and appetite and the continuous distraction of the world's insistence on itself. The feast that ends Ramadan is not a reward for endurance. Eid al-Fitr, the festival of breaking the fast, is, in the Sufi reading, the completion of a cycle rather than its cancellation. The one who returns to eating has not abandoned what the fast taught. Something has, in principle, been altered. The Arabic root of fitr, F-T-R, is the same root as fitra, the primordial human nature with which every person is born. The natural disposition toward God that the Quran insists is humanity's original constitution. Eid al-Fitr is, etymologically, the festival of return to original nature. What the fast removed was not food, but the accumulated distance from fitra. Eid marks the arrival at what was always already true. Rumi ends the passage in the Masnavi most closely associated with spiritual fasting with an image that refuses to be merely metaphorical. He speaks of the man who fasts until he becomes, in his emptiness, a flute. And the flute makes music not despite its emptiness, but because of it. The reed cut from the reed bed cries because it is hollow. The crying is the music. The music is the message. The separation that seemed like loss was the very thing that made speech possible. The reed's complaint is Ramadan's complaint. The fast is the hollow. The prayer that rises from the fasting person in the last watch of the night, when the body is still and the appetites have been quieted for 30 days, is the music that the hollow makes possible. Ibn Arabi closes his treatment of fasting in the Futuhat with a sentence that resists translation but not understanding. He writes that the one who truly fasts does not fast from food. They fast from everything that is not the real. And when they break their fast, they do not break it with food. They break it with the real itself. The month that the Quran marks as the month of the Quran's descent is also, in this reading, the month in which the descent can be received. The gate is open. The question Ramadan poses to each person who enters it is not whether they will abstain from eating, but whether they will be present for what the abstention makes possible.